What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today, and we are doing Nightrose Zarzan Premium. So let's start getting into where the credit is due, what the winning image is, the deck list, and go into some key plays. So before I touch about the winning image and of course the deck list, I want to first give credit to 100% of this to Evan Alberto. He is the one, and with his fellow card fighters, actually flesh out this version of Nightrose using Zarzan. With this engine, it's very powerful, and they did a lot of the work to get this to a good place where you could just pick up the deck, use his actual article on the blog, and actually learn how to use the deck. And of course, he has some videos to complement that with it. He has some videos that complement with that as well. So I'll link everything down in the description, so that way you can actually take that in-depth, slow dive into the deck. So I'm going to cover some of my experiences with this deck. I tweaked a little bit, but most of it is really his deck list, and I wanted to make sure and make that clear that it's entirely his work and that he should be accredited. Not only that, but he also does multiple articles on Rogue of the Seven Seas, so feel free to check out his articles. He has a phenomenal writer too, and has a lot of in-depth knowledge about granblue. So let's start talking about the winning image now. So the winning image with the deck is really just to be used Zarzan with Nightrose. And so for those that know, what does Zarzan even do? And so when it's placed, whether it be Vanguard Circle or Rearguard Circle, you can Soul Blast one, call up to 2 cards without the abilities of Continuous Act or auto abilities from your hand to Rearguard Circle. And if you call 2 cards, then you can turn one of those Cyclones in your G zone face up and draw 2 cards. So ideally, you want to call those 2 vanilla triggers or vanilla units to actually get the 2 draw, and not only that, but spam a field. This enables you also to flip something in the G zone. So cards like Obadiah, and then even further getting to the GB8, are much more quicker. With Obadiah, if you actually go into your first strike turn, you typically flip one card face up, and you only get 2 calls. But if you did as Zarzan beforehand, then you'll be able to actually call 4 units, and that's very powerful at that point, making a very solid Obadiah. Not only that, but you can even fetch Zarzan with Obadiah. But not only that, Colombard. Colombard is the one that, you know, if you were to reread his text and just change it up, it would just be Counterblast 1, fetch Zarzan. Right, that's the joke. But ultimately, Colombard is our unit that we fetch in the early game, so that way we could actually fetch Zarzan. Zarzan is limited to 1 currently in this time. In December 2020, there was a restriction list that impacted, so only a handful of few clans can really fetch pieces like Zarzan and actually get to be very consistent with it, to the point where you have a very solid build that either really depends on the Zarzan engine itself or goes with it half and half. There are some builds that, with different clans and different decks, that kind of have that as a complementary, but most of the entirety of those decks are just in place. So this helps with beefing up Obadiah turns. Not only that, but because you flip for every Cyclone, Cyclone gives your vanilla units 5k, and then with Nightrose's buff, it gives all that power too. So you really have some over 30k columns pretty easily in the early to mid game as well. And then of course we have Nightrose that further extends, and because the way Zarzan is worded when it's on place, you can actually revive it with Nightrose during the battle phase and call Zarzan to further extend attacks. So normally you would use a Colombard to get to the 5th battle. Now you can use Zarzan to use a Soul Blast instead of a Counter Blast. And in the future, once you get further in the game, your vanilla units get bigger and bigger. So 5k to 10k, 15k to 20k plus, and then of course Nightrose is just giving it an extra buff, and especially if you make columns, and that comes with the Bat Bounty turns, and then of course just regular Nightrose turns. So with that, let's just start getting into the deck list and talk about some of the ratios, why he did certain things and why I tweaked some things to my personal experiences, and then just go from there. And so onto the grade 3s, we have not changed anything that Evan actually concluded to. We are playing the 4 Nightroses, we're playing 3 Skull Dragons, 1 OG Break Right Night Mist, and of course 1 GB1 Nightstorm back in the day. So these cards have not changed in ratios, and I agree with pretty much all the ratios. I found myself even reducing Skull Dragon to 3 because that Megiddo turn just doesn't come up as often. You almost do the pseudo Megiddo turn with Bat Bounty. It's just much more powerful, especially when you have your VR or Negro Bones being able to revive these Skull Dragons. And then if your deck is able to mill enough or quick enough, those Skull Dragons are really big. So the ratios line up. Nightstorm is still our attack extender, and so what that card does, it's extending those attacks with Zarzan, with Colombard, and so on. You can really reach high thresholds of number of attacks. There's actually an article that covers a video that shows how to do that. But it's just a lot easier to attack extend, and so that's why we still play the Nightstorm. And It's GB1, so if you get Zarzan resolve in the early game, you can actually use it right away in the mid game, especially if you ride to your grade 3 turn, your opponent's still a grade 2, you can actually use Nightstorm and to get further attacks. So you can really get past the 5th battle to 6, 7 battles. I don't even know if you can get to 8 battles, but it's really nasty when you think about it when your opponent's still a grade 2. So that's definitely there. You just need enough counterblast to give it to you. With that being in mind. And then of course Night Mist, the break ride. For those who don't know, limit break 4 is when you have 4 damage or more. When a unit rides this card, you can call 2 cards from the drop zone into a rear guard circle and they get plus 5k until the end of the turn, and your vanguard that just rode gets 10k. So that actually goes with the bad bounty turn. So when you perform the re-ride from the drop zone with Nightrose, your break ride, that gives Nightrose additional power. But not only that, it revives 2 cards to further extend 2 more attacks and really put the nail on the coffin at that point. And so you can really go ham on those turns, and it doesn't use counterblast and doesn't use soul blast. Not only that, because you will ride this before you stride, you add something to the soul. And then of course when you rewrite with Nightrose, now you have soul to mess with Zarzan, of course, and then there's other cards that use soul blast as well. So that's really the grade 3s, and that's how they tie in. Let's start going into the grade 2s. On to the grade 2s. We are playing 10 grade 2s. We are playing 4 of the Columbard V series. We are playing 4 Nilly. She is our vanilla unit in the grade 2 slot. We have Great Shade, 1 copy only, and then 1 copy of the Ghost Ship. So Columbard is essential, so that's why we play for him. He is the card that you want to ride and fetch Zarzan with, honestly. And then, of course, in the mid to late game, you can just start reviving other stuff. And then, of course, fetching key pieces that you may want at that point. Nilda is the vanilla, vanilla unit that we actually just want to call with Zarzan's skill. It is a 15k shield, 7k grade 2. So the reason that this card is here, you want enough copies of vanilla units to be able to call. And if you just don't have enough, then it becomes very hard to resolve Zarzan, especially if you want to do it very early in the game. You just need to open up or draw into 2 vanilla units to be able to resolve our Zarzan when you fetch it with the Columbard. The 7k kind of comes up when you're in those matchups where you need to really damage deny. So you can ride this grade 2 and be a 7k and swing under even 8k grade 1s. So most of the V series cards are 8k base, so you can swing under that as well if they stay at grade 1. So you can just ride up, get your grade 2, get your drive check, especially if they have the Huam, which is a card that I'll cover actually in a bit, that forces your vanguard to attack. So why not ride a card like this, swing under, still get your drive check, put any triggers on a rear guard, and just be able to do your turn and move up into grade 3, and then of course striding. Now with the 2 cards over here, the one-offs, Ghost Ship is a card that we can still use to be able to, not only as a beater, but able to generate advantage. So those key plays can come up in the stride turns mainly. Most of the time before, outside of Zarzan, the go-to play was Columbard, Counterblast 1, fetch, Ghost Ship, revive it, right? Now you're doing it to get Zarzan, right? So that play isn't done as often, so this card comes up way later in the game. So it's more of like a supplementary card where if it was a little more essential, then you can probably bump it up to 2. But with that, we want to keep it at 1, just like Evan said. And with the Greed Shade, so there's a real reason that the grade 2 count is also lower than normal than usual. Sometimes we see 11 to 12 grade 2s. In fact, his build had 9. He took out the 4th Nilda out, so he had 9, and I had bumped it up to this because I changed some cards that I wanted to try out something different. So I figured I had the grade 2 vanilla unit here. But the reasoning behind it is that ultimately you want to ride Columbard to get Zarzan. So what do you do when you don't open up with Columbard? These other grade 2s don't really serve you, except with Nil, that maybe damage denial, but there are some games that damage denial doesn't really come up and you just want to go off anyway. So what's the strategy at that point? And the strategy is really just be able to reduce the grade 2 count, mulligan for your Columbards, and essentially just G-assist. G-assist, you're able to check the top 5, and then if you find your Columbard, you can grab it and then remove 2 cards from play. But if you're able to resolve the Zarzan anyway, then you'll get those 2 cards back. And that becomes very vital. But not only that, you flip a Cyclone face up in the G zone and your units get plus 5k that are vanilla, and you're already on the races at that point. So that's big reasons why he reduced the grade 2 lineup, and then cards like Greed Shade are even at 1. So Greed Shade can come up, but it's more of a quality life card, especially with this build, because ultimately This deck thrives on Zarzan resolving. I can't emphasize that enough. So Greed Shade's importance throughout the game isn't as much. And so that's why we're able to get away with such a low count of Greed Shade. So let's get into the grade 1 slot too, and that makes probably a little bit more better sense. Onto the grade 1s. We are playing 14 grade 1s. We are playing 4 Mikira, which is the Cray Elemental Vanilla. We have Zarzan, obviously. We have Hoam. We have 2 tiers. We have 4 Negaron V series, 1 Ripple Banshee, and 1 Dolph the Ghosty PG. So, touching with the Zarzan and the Cray Elementals first. Really, Zarzan, again, you want to resolve that. And cards like Mikira are really those vanilla units. It's a nice unit that has an 8k base. Some of the vanilla units in the original clans have 7k because they have the 15k shield. Mikira is a generic grade 1 that you could just splash in and just have that 8k base, but still have the 15k shield. So really that's why I play Mikira. And of course, cards like Tier are really your counter charge engine that you can use pretty much once you start having face-up cards, thanks to Zarzan. This is more important than Grenache from the G era, because with Grenache you have to wait till the end of turn. Tier is whenever it's placed. So if you have it in your hand, or if you revive it, you can immediately Soul Blast 2 and be able to countercharge for every copy that's face up that is a Cray Elemental in your G zone. So for example, if you have 2 Cyclones and a Rectum, those are 3 Cray Elemental units in general, so you can countercharge 3. So your level of countercharging really increases and scales up. And so you can even have those nasty plays where you can go up to like 13 attacks or something like that. And part of the reason you're able to do that is because if you call something like Tier, during the battle phase, you countercharge like 4 or 5 cards and then just keep relooping units that can call each other and go from there. With that, that's really why it's there for, and 2 copies is nice. It's also another card alongside with Hoam to be able to just ride and be swinging under if you need to as well, especially if you want to force them to give you a counterblast. If they ride an 8k grade 1 or a 7k grade 1, these cards have lowercase base. So then it puts them in the spot where if you're going to attack, you're going to swing just enough to actually give me a counterblast. So that's why those numbers even match up in certain matches. So Hoam, what does this card even do? And this card is nasty, to be honest. So it has a rearguard circle skill where all vanguards must attack the vanguard. So it's just like, wait, what? You have to attack the vanguard? Can you just ride and pass turn? No. If you ride anyway, you have to attack. This card forces you. So this is why it's nasty sometimes, because you are forcing them to give you a counterblast at that point. And when you call Zarzan, you have the ability to call them to the front row or those units in the back row. And if you call them to the front row, then their piggyback, their targets to be able to attack so they can counterblast deny you for the next turn and limit your plays. And so if you do open up with Hoam, or you actually call it with Columbard, just depending on the matchup, it can come up at that point. He was playing Tempest Sphere. He was playing the Mistoff that restricts like hand size to 8. I decided to change those to the Hoam and then to the extra grade 2 vanilla to fit those slots to my liking. Hoam hasn't come up as often, but it really just depends on your matchups and how often you're playing against like those competitive decks. So I still have it just in there, just in case, especially in the early game. So that's very vital. Now going to the granblue cards, we have 4 of the Negaron V. It is essential to have this piece. In fact, Alberto pointed out this is the card that you want to actually ride as your grade 1 target. So what happens is that when you ride Negaron V and then you ride Columbard V, you call this Zarzan and you can Soul Blast immediately the Negaron V. So then you have it live. So that's why. And then cards like Ripple Banshee, you can discard with Negaron V or other cards to really superior call it, or even superior call the Zarzan early on, because he can call grade 1s regardless. It's when it's 10 cards or more he can call anything else as well. So Zarzan being a grade 1, guess what? You can use Negaron with it very early on without having that drop zone count against you. And Ripple Banshee gives you that extra draw. You can Soul Blast stuff, so get it in the drop zone helps with Skull Dragon. And then, of course, the PG, which is another good right target just to help get into your deck a little deeper. So it's very vital, again, to get the Columbard and the vanilla units, so that way you can Zarzan. If you don't open up with the Zarzan, you can also ride Zarzan if you have to, just depending on what you have in your field. So you still resolve it at that point, and then you just have to Soul Blast it out. But ideally, you want it to be able to rearguard, because you can kill it by hand by calling something, or Nightrose's skill that self-retires and then recall it during the battle phase, things like that. You kind of just learn as you play the deck. And then the PG, again, is there for digging deeper. It's a grade 1 PG, so if any sentinel restrictions with grades, that kind of gets around that. You can Naga with it. It's just a card too, and it's a 7k base, so you can swing under, and if you force your opponent to give you a damage. So yeah. On to the grade zeros, we are playing 11 crit, 4 heal, and 1 draw. We have 2 of the crit sentinels here. We have 1 of the draw PG. So there is a very good reason for why each of these ratios actually matter, especially how Evan dives into the article. You want to make sure you have vanilla triggers. It helps a lot, and it's one of those easy slots that you can still play cards in your grade 2, grade 1, and grade 3 slots where they have skills. The triggers can be vanilla because most of the time the skills of triggers are kind of more supplementary to the deck itself. So that's why we play these vanillas over here. What's really cool about the Banshees over here, Wild Seas Banshee and Rough Seas Banshee, these cards go into Soul and draw you a card, and it helps fuel that Soul for Zarzan to be able to consistently resolve it turn after turn and after turn, and especially if you plan to use Tier to countercharge. So these cards become vital, and then of course when they're Soul Blasted, you can revive them and put them back into the Soul at that point with some skill, revival skill. And then of course, what's really cool, and it wasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? It caught me off guard, but it realized that when Zarzan resolves, you have GB1. So Wild Seas can be used on your grade 2 turn. So if you attack with your Columbard and you have GB1 active thanks to Zarzan, you could shove it into Soul, give your Vanguard plus 10k, and your Columbard by itself is 19k. I thought that was really cool. And then of course you can use this to boost a column before and then attack with the Vanguard, and then your last column is attacking at the Rigard. As a Rigard column. And so Rough Seas Banshee is really that. You call it on demand main phase soul charge, so that's why it's appreciated. The 5k doesn't really matter, especially if the Cyclones are giving the buffs up anyway to those vanilla units, which you are going to thrive in. And then we have 2 Chad the Ghosties just to help with striding. We are playing 9 grade 3s, but of course we are milling some of those, and Obadiah mills those for us, so Chad the Ghostie helps with consistently striding. Of course, as well, if you want to ride the break ride on Night Miss, then Chad could be the discard fodder to be able to stride still, so that helps with that too. The Rampage States are really nice just to be 1 card guards. Again, you can grab it with Greed Shade as a quality of life improvement. Negranora takes advantage of that, and we want more crits, so we're able to squeeze this in. Of course, a PG in the grade zeros, which is Gustion, and again, it's a draw trigger, so if you resolve it, it's kind of nice, but it doesn't really come up since it's only 1 draw trigger as there as a basically a PG for us to be able to. And then of course our V-Series Grenache just to get the Tika Shield if we get it, and dig deeper into our deck, so that way we can see that extra card versus running the G-Era Forerunner. Onto the G-Zone. For the Strides, we are playing 11 Strides. We are playing 4 Cyclones, 2 Big Obadiah, 2 Bad Bounty, 1 Megiddo, 1 Ballerina, and of course 1 Galleon. So with the Cyclones, obviously they're flip fodder for Zarzan. You could also stride them into your Vanguard circle if you are like damage denial. His skill is basically free. When a normal unit without any of the continuous act or auto abilities is revealed during the drive check for this unit being attacking, then you can stand 1 of your rearguards. So that helps with like doing something if you get counterblasted now. But most of the time, you just flip fodder. Not only that, we have Big Obadiah, which flips it as well. And then, of course, you can choose up to 5 cards from your deck, send it to the drop zone, and call up to 2 cards for every face-up card. Again, if you end up having to resolve 1 Cyclone being flipped up, then when you go into your first stride turn, you'll flip another copy. So you have 2 cards face-up in the field, revive 4. Which is phenomenal. It's very strong. You can revive your vanilla units and they become much more bigger boosters, especially the Macuras. So back in the Romario days, we would like to call Romario as a really good 12k booster. Now we have the Ripple Banshee, but then with the Macuras, they really scale up. So it really adds up, and then it just helps being those solid boosters too, but also attackers. And of course, Obadiah helps Dectans, and some of the concepts that Evan talks about in his article is filtration, compression for like a very deadly drive check as the game keeps going, and your deck just is in a very good spot to drive check a lot of critical triggers. In triggers in general, but you are playing a lot of critical triggers if you think about it. So you can really end the game with that. And then of course you have Bad Bounty. Again, you have that break right Nightrose Bad Bounty turn. You have just being able just to be a restanding Vanguard, especially if you face Mega Colony. Mega Colonies comes up, especially with the Cradle Marker mechanic. It removes the abilities for those units that the Cradle Markers replace. So which means cards like Cyclone give them power. So if one of your units that has an ability gets cradle, they're considered a vanilla unit, and now they get affected by cyclones. So if you have a 9k grade 2 that gets cradled and you have 2 cyclones, it automatically goes from 0 to back up to 10k as a vanilla. And it's just like, wait, what? So it kind of helped you, especially with most of the skills in Vanguard. For granblue in particular, like on our grade 2 slots, they're on place. So once they're on the field, they're dead. So if they cradle them, now your units just become bigger. So it helps you. So keep mindful of that, and it's really helpful with the Mega Colony matchup, but it's just a great restanding Vanguard turn, and you can really end games, like I said, put the nail in the coffin. And then we have some other fallback strikes like Megiddo, we have Galleon, and Ballerina. The Megiddo, again, we have Skull Dragons, and not only that, we have our vanilla units that just get bigger. So we can call those units and really take advantage of that if we need to. We have GB8. As you're flipping Cyclones, there comes to a point where you flip all 4 of them, and you use Obadiah as well to flip more stuff alongside of that, and resolving Zarzans. You can get to GB8 pretty quickly, especially if you're going through your deck a lot quicker with Zarzans drawing you. You can G-Guard as well, so GB8 is really possible really quick, especially second stride or third stride. And then of course Ballerina, just in case it hasn't come up for me, but it does have that ability where you can't, where your opponent's Guardian's place, you can discard 1 greater 1 or less and pop it, but it's really there because it doesn't cause a counterblast. But we have Cyclones, so you can go fall back into that. But if you flip them all, I guess you can fall back into Ballerina. It just not has come up for me. This is honestly more of a flex spot. What I was testing out, Evan actually was playing 3 bad bounties. I was like, wow, that's a lot. But if it works, it works. So that's one thing, especially if you're going against a lot of Mega Colony. So yeah. Lastly, the G-Guards. They actually have a matter. We are playing Tour the Negro Nora because it's a very solid card, a biggest shield. It's a G flip too, so it gets closer to GB8 if we really need to. Negro Lily is an addition back to the deck. It costs a counterblast to be able to get 10k. You have to retire one of your regards, of course, and you can revive a ghosty normal unit. But the point is that the soul becomes so important in this deck that when you are playing normal Nightrose in premium or standard, you use up your soul and it isn't really a problem. But if you play with the same mindset and aren't wary about the Zarzans resolving too, you will run out of soul. So cards like Negro Lily really come into play where I would rather use a counterblast to use some shield, and because units like Negro Mode and Negro Nora use Soul Blast, that comes up into play actually. So that's why the Negro Lily is back into the deck. That was actually some founding that Evan found, and as I was playing the deck, it made me realize like, yeah, this card is actually relevant. Again, you would rather use the counterblast instead of a Soul Blast. That's kind of ironic, right? And so with Negro Mode is there too. It's not GB1, so you can use it as soon as possible. 5k for every 5 cards in the drop zone, and then of course Rectum. It's a discard fighter, helps you dig deeper into your deck, like I said. Not only that, it is a Cray Elemental, so it counts for the counter charging for tier as well. This is a combo part of the video, so I wanted to highlight a couple things that I think are very important just to demonstrate. Just like I mentioned with the Negrobone and Columbard ride progression, I just wanted to show up on how that looks like. So these are really the key pieces that you would like to see mulligan. Of course, you would want your grade 3 Nightrose. Let me fetch it. There we go. Got it. So this is kind of like an ideal generic opening hand that you would like to see. So when it's your turn, let's say you're going first. You would ride, draw a card, of course, draw a card from Grenache. But leave it as that, right? And so when your opponent attacks you, you'll deal 1 damage, right? So you got 1 damage right here just for you. And so your following turn, you draw, and then you finally ride the Columbard. That's when you can counterblast, fetch the Zarzan, and here is a very cool play. This is where you can actually Soul Blast the Negrobone and actually call the 2 vanilla units. Call it over that. So you can do this and this if you want. Let's say you do that, you draw 2 more cards. Let's say you draw 2 more cards, and then from your draw you have these cards. So you flip the Cyclone, this is your field, you draw more cards. Then you can use the Negrobone to discard something, let's say this, to bottom deck it, and then of course revise Zarzan. And if you want, you can leave the Zarzan right here, use the skill again to Soul Blast this unit. And in this case, I could just do this instead and call these 2, and again, draw 2 more cards. But the point is, as soon as you ride to grade 2, because you rode Negrobone first, rode into Columbard with 1 counterblast, you fill up your board and you have GB2 live. And just like that, you're in a very good spot. And one of the strategies that Evan had mentioned is that if you want to deny first stride in certain matchups, you can stay agree to. Because you have some power columns, and if they, attack you and everything, you still have like that power up advantage that you're not missing out at that point. And because Zarzan helped you with drawing more cards, you're able to just kind of go through your deck more better at that point too. Another key play that I want to show off is actually, let's say you just didn't have the Zarzan early on, and you get to the point where you ride to grade 3 and you're able to stride into Obadiah. So the point is like, what do I do from now? And so you can counterblast to be able to fetch for pieces and revive Zarzan and Nightstorm. So with those two pieces being only cold because you only have one face-up card due to Obadiah's skill, then Zarzan can trigger. You can Soul Blast one card and call the vanilla triggers to actually call these here. Now, these numbers actually matter. So for example, if the trigger here, 5 plus 8 actually makes 13. Of course, Zarzan gets a power up from Obadiah's skill. And then of course, Cyclones being face up, this makes it a 10k booster. So it passes that 23k mark, as you can see. Not only that, we have Nightstorm plus 8, that's 19. And if you even had a 7k, this makes the 18 number. And then the power up goes behind the 23k threshold as well. So you can actually just attack and then attack. And if you have another counterblast, then you can call something, and you can kind of see my drift at that point. But essentially, you just built a field really easily. You use one counterblast, Soul Blast, boom, 4 on the field. You flipped another Cyclone, so you're GB3 too, and it's actually a solid numbers too. So that way you don't have to worry about like making decent numbers and generate an advantage and all that kind of stuff. So little stuff like that really points out. And so yeah. And that's the deck profile, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, this goes credit fully to Evan Alberto and his fellow card fighters that helped him play test this deck, refine it to the point that it is. And again, I can go much more in depth because this deck has a lot of in-depthness even compared to the normal Nightrose builds. So this video is already kind of long, but like I said, I'll put the links in the description. You can read the articles. You can see the other videos that are supplementary to this to really get a good handle of Nightrose Zarzan and really take some time to learn how to play the deck. This is not a deck that you can just kind of start playing and expect to do really well against any matchup. There are those small little things like I just pointed out, and even small other things that you may not be aware of that you need to learn as well. And I also want to take this quick moment to thank you everybody, especially that recently subscribed to the channel. Thank you, it means a lot. I like doing deck profiles, especially when I get to do the real life cards, and I also get to use the online stuff like CFA and of course CFV Plus. But again, we just hit over 700 subscribers, so thank you again. It's December 2020. Our reasonable goal is 750 by the end of the year, and our stretch goal is 1,000. So if you are not a subscriber, I would appreciate you hitting the subscribe button, hitting that bell to get the notifications as these deck profiles come out and interviews as well. Again, you can check out the description for those links, for those like interviews, those articles, those of course complimentary videos like I mentioned for the deck. Like the video, give me down some feedback on the comments, share it with a friend, and subscribe. See ya, amigos. Bye.